I'd like to introduce our next speaker. He's written a few titles of books that you're probably not going to forget. One's called The No Asshole Rule, and the other is The Asshole Survival Guide. So I was listening to this podcast this week that was recorded in 2015, a few days ago, and Bill Campbell was being interviewed by Randy Komisar. He actually sent it around to some of you, and he references Bob's book. By the official name, by the way. But Bill was very much a plain talker. He talked to us about leadership, and he learned it sort of with plain language. Bob's research is about scaling excellence and decision-making, and then the sort of messy reality of dealing with power. And he's kind of done a great job of helping some of the people who think they're the best executives in the world, kind of laugh when he's dismantling their tried and true business practices. Whether it's in startups in Silicon Valley or Fortune 1000 companies, he works with high-performing teams. He helps them understand that excellence isn't about talent. It's how people treat other people when they're not watching. Please welcome someone who makes a mission to build better teams, better leaders, and perhaps a place with fewer jerks. Bob Sutton.
All right. Okay. Hello. What a crowd, what a place. This place is unbelievable. Okay, so what we're going to do, so I am going to talk about my latest book with Huggy Rao. There's the cover, The Friction Project. But because this event is about Bill Campbell and is the Campbell Trophy folks, I just want to say a few words about Bill Campbell, because Bill Campbell was not I probably met him 5 times, but not somebody like Mark, who I really knew. But just the swath of influence that he had on people in Silicon Valley and around was just astounding. And just as a little aside, the other emotional connection I had with him is that some of you may know that he bought a sort of mediocre restaurant in downtown Palo Alto and called it the Old Pro. So I worked in that exact same building in high school. And in junior college, delivering pizzas, I worked my way up to night manager, $2.50 an hour. That was my maximum pay. And by the way, as an aside, I know we have some connection with the same high school. The Old Pro was the place that my daughters would go with their fake IDs to get drinks. So they had low standards for certain things at the Old Pro. But just some of the people he's influenced, speaking of the no asshole rule type stuff, Mark talks about them. Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz, the famous venture capital firm. The best post I've ever seen about how to do a layoff in a humane manner, which is something that is just a fact of life in many organizations. He refers to Bill Campbell over and over again. Shona Brown, who is probably the student I had who got richest on her own. She was eventually number 4 at Google, and now she's lead board member at DoorDash and Atlassian. So she always credits Bill Campbell, Randy Komisar, Brad Smith of Intuit fame. The list goes on and on. The most interesting ones, and I probably met Steve Jobs 3 times, but I didn't know him. But I heard really a lot about Jobs from a guy named Ed Catmull. Some of you may know that Ed Catmull was founder and ran Pixar for 25 years. So he met with Steve Jobs every week for 25 years. And so remember, I wrote the book, The No Asshole and the Asshole Survival Guide. In the first book, I described Steve Jobs as an asshole and actually talked about him in the chapter on the virtues of assholes. But then when Ed Catmull saw that, he made this really interesting argument, which was that Steve actually got more and more civilized with age. And one of the key reasons was that Bill Campbell and him went for a walk every Sunday and talked about stuff. So Bill Campbell even appeared to make Steve Jobs less of an asshole, at least if I believe Ed Catmull. Okay, so just as a beginning, I'm honored that the tradition continues. And now let's switch gears. So I have kind of 2 rules when I speak, and so please help me. One is, first one is that I always end on time, because it's always better leaving people wanting more rather than less. And so we will end at 2:30. I've got all these slides. We'll have some conversation, but I'll just pretend and land the plane at 2:30 no matter where we're at. So don't worry, I won't keep you for a long time. And then the second thing, and some of this is built into this, and we do have folks with microphones. Where's the folks with microphones? Do we have folks with microphones here? We will. Oh, Oh, okay, so we will have folks with microphones. And if not, you can just yell at me. So it's my job to talk. It's your job to talk, and it's my job to stop you, is the rule. So raise your hand, argue with me, make a comment, and some of that will be baked in. Okay, so let's start. So this is my colleague, Huggy Rao. We're actually standing next to the Dumbarton Bridge. Huggy and I have, really since about 2005, been working in the same area, even though I'm known as the asshole guy in regular culture. For the most part, I work on leading large, complex organizations. That's the main thing that my research is about and has been about for about 40 years. And so when we think about leading at scale or leading large, complex organizations or organizations that want to become large, complex organizations, or at least their leaders do, there's three areas that we mess with. The first two were the main focus of a book we published in 2014 called Scaling Up Excellence. The first one is old-fashioned Silicon Valley growth. Scale, baby, scale. How do we scale this thing up? How do we grow it? How do we grow it faster? That's what the venture capitalists want. That's how they get that huge return on investment. The next one, another element of leading at scale, which is what academics used to call scaling before the venture capitalists got a hold of it, which is that you've got something you think is good and you want to spread it throughout the system. So in my life as an academic, it's been the quality movement, it's been the agile movement, it's been design thinking, now it's AI, artificial intelligence. But part of your job as a leader, even if you're just leading one team, is you've got something good and you want everybody to use it. So that's the second kind of scaling, or element of scale. But then the third thing was there's all these organizations, just being an old professor and being around Stanford for a long time, that they start as a little cute organization, and the leaders want to scale, baby, scale, and then they look at what they've got and they can't believe how hard it is to get anything done because it's such a bureaucratic mess. So the last time I was on the payroll at Facebook would have been 2000. I was briefly a consultant. I got fired when they had this new COO, Sheryl Sandberg, come in and fire the consultants. I was one of the ones that got fired, and probably deserved it, by the way. The whole company was in a room about the quarter the size of this room. It was in the Sheraton right over there, and the company has scaled and scaled and scaled. And some of you may know that some of Zuckerberg's complaints are how hard it is to get done, how bureaucratic it is, how many layers they have. So we got very interested in this idea of a problem. And if you look across my history as an author, usually when I write a book, it's because I'm pissed off about something. And that certainly was the case with the no asshole rule. That's also why Huggy and I started working on this book, The Friction Project. We will get some friction stories from you soon. I'm sure they're already running through your head. One example, just to give you a little bit of the taste of kind of thing that got us going. So some of you may work in companies where there's a meeting of the top team every week, the executive team meeting. This is a consulting job by Bain, and what they figured out was in one big company that 300,000 hours were devoted a year to all those backstage meeting and research to get the team ready for the week. And one of the times about a year ago, I was talking to a group of middle managers at Genentech. They all popped up their laptops and described all the work they were doing to get the team ready for the meeting the next week. Another example, and I'll return to this, with all this discussion of government inefficiency and waste, fraud, and abuse and so forth, this is an interesting example. In the state of Michigan, there was, I emphasize the word was, the longest, most complicated benefits form in the United States to get health care benefits, to get food, to get money. 42 pages long, 1,000 questions, 18,000 words. And my favorite question was, when was your child conceived? Now, I'm not going to answer that question. I have 3 children. I'm going to take the 5th. But maybe you can answer that question. I can't. And then speaking of children, my daughter Eve, when she got her first job at a company called Color, I was just talking about this with someone, she was like a customer service rep. And she flips open her laptop, and she had 15 apps, 20 open screens. This is sort of like the software stack that's so big that every company struggles with. So at Stanford, we struggle with this constantly. Okay. So that's sort of the bad news, and this is the emotional part. This is an HP middle manager. I'm swimming in a sea of shit. I'm just trying to stay afloat. They want me to show initiative, but it's impossible. Maybe you've had that feeling that it's just so hard to get this done, I just give up, I want to crawl in a hole. Okay, so Huggy and I, we get pissed off, but then, since we have the privilege of being tenured professors and having way too much time on our hands, we spent 7 or 8 years doing case studies. I even had a podcast for a couple of years. We did some academic research. We talked to a lot of smart people. And then we kind of came up with a point of view on what we would call the friction problem. And this is the main idea. If you're going to remember one thing, this is the whole book really in a slide, that the best leaders are trustees of others' time, friction fixers with the will and skill to make the right things easier and the wrong things harder. And I want to sort of drill into 2 things that I think we sort of learned along the way. There'll be details we'll get into. The first thing that we learned was that actually, although we were pissed off about how screwed up all the organizations we know are, there's all these things that organizations, leaders, people in the front lines do to actually make things easier. It's not a lost cause. There's stuff you can do to make things easier. The second thing is that not everything should be easy or even possible, even if you want to do it. That sometimes slowing down, making things absolutely impossible is actually important. So that's sort of the whole point of what we're going to talk about for the next hour and 10 minutes, and the rest is details. Okay, so here's some friction fixing. Here's a Stanford grad, Mary Barra. She's got one of the hardest jobs in the world, running General Motors. You want a hard job? My God. Anyhow, so they showed her the dress code and said maybe we should shorten it. She shortened it to dress appropriately from 10 pages. I think this is friction fixing. Eric Schmidt, who used to be CEO of Google, once they asked him what the dress code should be at Google, he said, wear clothes. So that was even broader, okay? So that's an example. Another example, we all know when we go to the doctor in the United States, and this is true in almost every country in the world now, they don't look at you, they look at the screen, or the nurse looks at the screen because they're maintaining their electronic health records. And electronic health records, which is supposed to be a software cure, but now causes all sorts of problems. So this woman, Dr. Melinda Ashton, she led this Don't Get Rid of Stupid Stuff campaign at Hawaii Pacific Medical. It's the biggest healthcare system in Hawaii. And essentially, she and her team asked for suggestions of things to eliminate in the electronic health records, and they got rid of all these things. They eliminated all these unnecessary steps in the context. So this to me is an example of what sort of friction fixing looks like. All right, get ready, because pretty soon I'm going to ask you to talk to your neighbor and develop some ideas. I've been going 10 minutes, or 12 minutes is probably long enough. So one of the concepts that we learned in the book, and we talk about in the book, and this came from my friend Perry Claiborne, who I teach with at the Stanford D School, is that although the first 2 examples I talked about are people in relatively powerful positions, all of us, or almost all of us, have the power to make things easier or harder within our zone of influence. And to give you an example, this is 2021, sort of as we're coming out of the pandemic. My mother passed away, and I had to go to the DMV in Redwood City to change her vehicle registration. So the DMV in Redwood City is the same one I got my driver's license at when the test when you're like 16 years old. So this would have been 55 years ago for me. And I had all morning sort of laid out to be there. So I get in line, 7:30, there's 60 people in front of me, and oh shit, I'm going to be here all day. You know that feeling? And then at about 7:45, a guy walks down the line and asks each of us why we are there. And I later found out this guy's called a greeter. Some people he would say, well, you want to get a passport, you can't get a passport at the DMV, so you got to go home. Other people he'd suggest it would be easier to do online. And with me, he gave me the form I needed to fill out and a pen. And told me what window to go to, and I was out of there by 8:20 in a state of confusion. And so this guy, who was a friction fixer, and subsequently, by the way, since the book was published, we did a case study with the head of the DMV. His name is Steve Gordon. And Steve Gordon, in the last 6 years, has done a whole bunch of digitization, and he's improved a whole bunch of processes. So for example, if you get your real ID, most of us are required to get their real ID. They did a whole bunch of process improvement where it used to be if you were at the window with the person, it would take 28 minutes on average. Now it takes 8. So they have made a whole bunch of different changes. And one thing Steve Gordon did before I turn you loose is, in a world where people seem to be impatient about fixing government and not know how it works when they try to fix it, Steve Gordon got in his car and visited all 180 field offices and asked the people in the front lines what needed to be fixed. And then he started fixing them and really doing a lot of things that pissed them off, but he learned how the system works. Okay, so the message here is we're all friction fixers and we can do good stuff. So I'd like to start out optimistic, so find a neighbor or two, and I want you to basically talk about what have you done in the past, you and your colleagues. What have you done to actually make things easier, to reduce the burden on your colleagues and customers? Spend a couple minutes brainstorming, and we'll have a few reports out of good friction fixing. Go find a neighbor, talk about it, and in 3 minutes we're going to have a few report outs. So now I want to start with a volunteer behind the railing, because the people in the back should have nowhere to hide, is always my perspective. Somebody raise your hand. Let's have an example of some good friction fixing. All right. And we've got people with microphones. All right. Thank you, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
All
perfectly.
Right. Great. I work with a company. We do commercial furniture, and we have a workflow automation software that has a project that goes through these statuses so that things don't fall through the crack. And it was a software that we created with a company, and to roll it out, we slowly rolled it out to all the different people. And as we were rolling out, we're still making changes to it to tweak it. And what was happening is the changers, so the IT department was fielding all of these responses from every department, and they were making changes on the fly. And I raised my hand and said, why don't we slow down all these changes? Let's get in a room and establish why we're changing it before we just make the change, because what we determined and found out was this department said, we don't like this, so we need to change this because it's making it hard on us. We make the change, and 3 other departments are like, it's almost impossible for us now. So we realized that it's going to be difficult for some departments. The goal is that nobody's eating a shit sandwich all the time.
What? So in this example, what you got was the people from the different silos together in one room to fix it. So that's a really round of applause. Okay, so I want another volunteer. So right now, I'm very pleased to report there's a Simplify Stanford movement going on. Our new president, John Levin, this is one of his top 3 goals. And this challenge that this gentleman is talking about is one of the main things we have to work on are the different departments and the handoffs between silos. And the bigger and more complicated your organization, the worse it is. Okay, let's have 2 or 3 more. So, somebody in the front can raise their hand now. Oh, yes, sir, fellow in the blue shirt. Oh, you've got somebody running. Oh, you've got a hard job because it's like 100 yards to run. All right.
Thank you. So a pretty simple example. I used to work for a company, sales organization. Making it easier on the customer was always the #1 way to increase your sales. And so when it comes to paperwork, an old process was very paperwork driven, back and forth, takes hours of getting it done. My process, which allowed me to move to the top of the company, was to ask most of the questions on the paperwork throughout my discovery phase and throughout all the different processes that takes you to the closing stage. And once that happened, I was then able to complete 90% of the paperwork. I only needed 4 things from a customer. They needed 3 minutes to complete the next step, and I was able to submit that paperwork without having to bog down a different department of mine or have their commitment take more time than it needed.
So what's your name again?
Jason Grady.
Jason, so I really like this example because you were able to simplify because you figured out the customer journey and what they actually needed. So this is a really good, so a little round of applause. Thank you. Maybe one more. All right, somebody in the middle, I like that.
So let me preface this by saying I'm an emergency physician, so this is a little more relevant, both to do with people's urine. So sometimes waiting on a urine sample can be the last thing that we need to safely send someone home, and sometimes people don't have to pee at that particular moment. So we designed a system for our nurse to triage patients for anything remotely to do with the urinary system, to go ahead and get a urine sample before they even make it to a room. Ooh. So we have that. That sometimes saves us 20, 30 minutes, an hour even, to get that study and open up that room for the next patient. And then secondly, if the system recognizes a urinary tract infection, it automatically fires an order for a urine culture, therefore saving the doctor a missed urine culture, saves us a few clicks, and optimizes our system, makes it a little bit more efficient.
Okay, so what's your name, Dr.?
Tyler Sullivan.
Oh, yeah, so a round of applause. I don't think I can beat that. I think we're gonna end on that. So, but I love that example of dissecting, just changing the P process. That's absolutely beautiful. Okay, so I like this, and one thing I've learned to start out optimistic, because even though and we'll do some moaning and bitching in a few minutes, don't worry, but it's easy to complain about stuff. But the most amazing thing is that most of the people who we know in organizations want to make things better, and there's actually a lot of them who do make things better, and I don't think I can beat this example of the P process, but it's just amazing how many improvements that have been happening in the organizations we've looked at. Even my own university, Stanford, has been doing things better to my amazement, so some good things are happening. Okay. So the way that the book is organized, the book is probably too long, and in my editor help, it's still probably too long, but we essentially broke it into 5 different sort of traps, that friction traps, and we think of these as sort of on-ramps for intervention. One, my favorite one, which is the most fun to talk about, is oblivious leaders. These are leaders who have no awareness of how their actions just lead to burdens for thousands of people sometime. Just as an example, we start the book, the first paragraph, with a 1,266-word email with a 7,500-word attachment sent by a senior Stanford official who wanted all 2,000 faculty members to spend a day brainstorming about the new sustainability school, the John Doerr School. John Doerr is another one of Bill Campbell's mentees, by the way. So he had $1 billion to donate to Stanford, in part because of Bill Campbell. So this is one reason people love Bill Campbell so much. But that's an example of an administrator just being oblivious to their cone of friction. They sent out this email to 2,000 people, the 7,500-word attachment. So we talked about oblivious leaders and ways to fix that. Addition sickness, we're going to dig into that in quite a bit of details. Broken connections. The gentleman in the back, I've already forgotten your name, from the furniture company, this is a great example of he brought together the people from the different silos to fix broken connections. And you also have some of that with healthcare. The example from our emergency room physician with healthcare is really interesting, because if you look at a lot of the problems, especially in the US healthcare system, one of the reasons there's so much friction is there's so much fragmentation and the pieces aren't glued together. And this was a case of, with the P process, understanding the links in the process and what had to be done so you could redesign them. Then there's jargon monoxide. This is incomprehensible language, pure bullshit that people use that makes it just impossible to understand what they've done. Just as an example, so my wife, I got to be careful because there's a guy named AJ. Where's AJ? Where are you, AJ? Oh yeah, so AJ's in the team. So AJ's a very important person to me. He works for JP Morgan. He's in the team that has most of my family's money. And his team, by the way, is, and I don't want to recommend your services, but I recommend their services. Are absolutely awesome, but they do work in this big bureaucracy called JP Morgan. They got acquired. They were at First Republic. And so we had a $53,000 fraud where somebody forged one of our checks that we've been fighting to have it back. And my wife, who is a former lawyer and an excellent lawyer, she spent 4 days reading all of the rules and regulations. And by the way, if you've seen the email, JP Morgan owes us the $53,000 immediately. But she had to spend 5 days reading things written, the jargon monoxides, by government officials. And this is the classic sort of thing, especially when we become specialists and we know really a lot about stuff, it becomes impossible for people to understand us. That, by the way, speaking of Bill Campbell, he almost used no 2-syllable words. That guy he was the opposite of a jargon monoxide guy. And then the last one, which we'll talk about, is fast and frenzied. This is situations where friction's good, where you need to slow down. So those are the two we're going to talk about. Okay, so let's talk about addition sickness. And you're about, I'd say, 10 or 15 minutes from having to get back in your duo or trio. So start thinking about things that drive you crazy. So the reason we call this addition sickness is if you look at the way that humans and the human organizations we are part of operate, our natural tendencies as a species, together and alone, is when we face a problem, we solve it by adding more and more complexity. And just as an example, here's my friend Leidy Klotz. He's got this book called Subtract. He and his colleagues in an academic journal called Nature, which is a very prestigious journal, they published about 20 studies, and no matter what challenge they gave human beings, fix a university, fix a Lego model, plan a vacation, improve a recipe, no matter what task they gave people, people would try to fix it by doing addition rather than subtraction. That's our natural tendency. And the reason that they argue that this happens is from an evolutionary perspective. If you think about who survived to breed and who people would want to breed with, those were the people who had all the food and all the firewood and so forth. So there's an evolutionary reason that we sort of like hoard stuff, because it gets you through the winter and stuff. So that's the first thing, is we're wired that way. The second thing is most organizations I know, including the lovely one you're sitting in right now, Stanford University, the people who add shit rather than take it away, those are the people who get the most money, the most recognition. It can be adding software. It could be adding a new exciting program, which I've been involved in doing. And my favorite one, which is a problem that both Google has and Stanford has, which is interesting because there's a guy named John Hennessy who was president of Stanford for 17 years and has been the lead board member at Google from the minute they went public. So at both Google and Stanford, the more people who report to you as a manager, independently of the value that those people provide, the more you get paid. That's one of the best ways to get a raise, is to increase the size of your team. So and what happens when you add more people? Well, they create work, more rules, more meetings, so you end up with more and more sort of friction. So that's the second one. And the third one, and this is the great philosopher, scholar you've probably heard, George Carlin, my shit is stuff, your stuff is shit. So this is the problem that I think all of the shit that you're adding just needs to be taken away because it's useless, your rules, your meetings and so forth. But I've got my precious software. I've got my precious initiative, and you can't take it away from me. And I think all of us do this. It's something that's close to our identity. There was one point in my life, and I'm somewhat embarrassed to admit this, that I'm the co-founder of something called the Stanford, one of the co-founders, the real founder is a guy named David Kelly, of something called the Stanford Design School. And some of you may have lived through design thinking movement in some of your organizations. And there was a point where I believed that design thinking was a solution to every problem on earth. We should all be practicing design thinking every minute. Now I think design thinking is good for some things and bad for others, and I was overly excited about it. But I went through that period where my shit was stuff and everybody should be doing it all the time, and don't take it away from me. Okay, that's the bad news. The good news is if you look at research on essentially how you get people to subtract, if you prompt them and say, how would you subtract? And if you reward them, if you celebrate them, it actually can happen. And so this is Michael Deering, early stage venture capitalist, kind of a crazy, it's pretty, see how he has this long hair and this beard? So one of his big investments is Harry's Razors, which is kind of funny. He only shaves about once or twice a year. So anyway, so Michael, crazy early stage venture capitalist, done all sorts of companies, masterclass and so forth. And he has this argument when we interviewed him that the best leaders think of themselves as editors-in-chief. And think about what a good film editor does, what a good book editor does, is a lot of their job is taking out stuff that doesn't need to be there. So putting that on your sort of cap, let's think about what editors-in-chief might do. And what I'm going to do, to give you a preview, I'm going to go through some of these, and pretty soon we're going to be playing the subtraction game in your duos or trios. So start thinking about what you want to get rid of, where you work or maybe where you used to work. Okay, so here's some tools. Simple rules. So this is my colleague Kathy Eisenhart and a guy named Don Saul. They wrote a book on simple rules, shortcuts, crisp constraints that either make it hard to add or easy to subtract. This is one of my favorite ones. I was just bashing Google for their problems with addition. They have made some movement. So there's this interesting guy named Laszlo Bock. He was essentially head of HR at Google for about 10 years. So he gets to Google, and he finds out they have a tradition. He actually learned it. I actually just talked about this earlier this week. When they interviewed him to be head of HR, they did more than 25 different interviews. And he figured out this was actually standard, that just to hire a regular engineer, even straight out of college, they do 8, 10, 12 interviews. And this actually made sense, speaking of scaling. In the very early days, when Larry and Sergey started Google, they wanted to have people who were great engineers and would be great leaders to build the culture they wanted. So in the early days, the first couple hundred employees, this sort of made sense. And it took, Laszlo was just talking about this, it took years. They were up to 6,000 or 7,000 employees before Larry stopped insisting on signing off on every single hire. So anyhow, so what he did to get rid of this sort of addition sickness and this old problem is he put in a simple rule, which is that if you are going to do more than 4 job interviews for a candidate, you need written permission from me. And it's not, friction fixing is not usually this simple, but I mean, just about 3 months ago, I was talking to a team of Google recruiters, and they still have much of this discipline. So this is a simple rule. Another example, one of my favorite one, and this is one that I've been using at Stanford lately, is the 50% rule. And this is, you have a process. Suppose you remove 50% of the steps, 50% of the people, what would it look like? And the one that I've been using lately, and this is part of the Simplify Stanford movement, to promote a Stanford professor, to get them tenure, it's one of the most, it's such an exacting process. I've chaired a lot of tenure committees. It usually takes about a year of work for a committee. And one of the things that we do when we evaluate a faculty member is we get letters of recommendation from 12 or 15 faculty and from every PhD student they've ever had. The last tenure case I chaired, her name was Melissa Valentine, had, I believe, 35 letters of recommendation. And so I said, what if we cut it by 50%? I said this to our dean, Jennifer Whittam. Would it have any effect on the decision? And everybody says no. So we have made progress on cutting the letters. Another example, this is Rob Cross, who studies social networks and stuff. He was consulting to a senior executive, I think this was at Microsoft, although he doesn't admit it. And this guy had essentially about 22 direct reports and was getting zillions of emails a day. And Rob talked him into getting rid of half his direct reports. He didn't fire him, he just, we're no longer his direct reports. So that's one approach. So how many of you are in organizations where there's too many meetings? Is this a problem? Yeah, me too. Okay, so this is one of my students, former students, Rebecca Hines. She used to work at Asana, like every one of my students. She now just moved to an AI startup, of course. But anyhow, so in her group at Asana, what she did was she took 60 employees in the marketing department, and for 30 of them, she had them remove all standing meetings with 5 or fewer people for 48 hours and add them back in. And for all of them, she had them just analyze, well, how important is this meeting and how much work is it? And then she coached them a little bit. And after it was over, the average person saved about 4 hours a month. And if you look at the numbers, this wasn't so much for canceling meetings, although some were canceled. They were made shorter, they were made smaller. So that's another example. We've got to talk about AI since you're at Stanford. And this is back to the healthcare setting. So this is a really interesting use of ChatGPT. This is by Lifespan, which is the largest healthcare system in Rhode Island. And they had a surgical consent form, and there's a lot of jocks there. How many of you signed a surgical consent form in your life? Yeah. How many of you read it? Is the other question. I don't understand. Anyhow, so what they did was they put this thing in ChatGPT, their old surgical consent form, and they said, make it simpler and make it shorter. And you can see there's the 14-word prompt. And some of you may know that the average American reads at the 6th grade. So this is one of the problems with consent form. And they've shortened the form, and now 35,000 patients a year are signing a shorter, more understandable form. And I'm not going to read this all to you, but you can see that the first paragraph of the consent form was at the 12th grade level. It had 45 words, and now it's at the 4th grade level and has 19 words. So, these large language models, these AI tools we use, they have their challenges, and if you leave them to their own devices, they'll make things more complicated, but they can make things simpler too. Okay, so let's move to the subtraction game. Let me warm you up and start looking at your duo and trio. So this is something that Huggy and I, really going back to our last book, Scaling Up Excellence, have played with, well, more than 100 organizations, and everything from doing it online with 400 Salesforce vice presidents to little sort of top management teams. And we asked them, well, what's in the way? What can you get rid of? So we're going to be asking you this in a minute. But to give you an example of some that have worked, so this is a Microsoft executive. We've got 25 senior Microsoft executives online. It was on Teams, unfortunately, a terrible software program if you use it. Anyhow, so we're using Teams, and one of the EVPs got rid of a stalled project that had been around forever. A more interesting one is that there was this. I was doing this with a pharmaceutical company outside of Chicago, and the general counsel raises his hand, and he says, so we're an international company. We're in a whole bunch of different markets and countries, and so we have 80 different family leave policies, 80. And he wrote me 2 weeks later that he'd gotten it down to 60. So these are examples of like subtraction that's actually happened as a result of this. But to warm us up, what I want you to do now is, so essentially get back in your duos or trios, think about the stuff where you work, or maybe your last job, that cause unnecessary obstacles for employees, for customers, and think about if you had the power, what you would get rid of and why. So do just what you did last time, spend 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll have some report outs, okay? Go for it. Okay, so let's start out with the first volunteer behind the fence, as last time. I like starting with the people in the back. Let's get a nice, juicy subtraction target. There we are. Somebody always raises their hands. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Tom Burns. I work for Stanford Mission Completion. It's the world's plutonium legacy waste remediation contract down there.
Wow.
We have about 4,200 employees, several of them remote, and one of the things that was a humongous pain in the ass is badging twice a year, having to physically come in to get your badge recoded. It's a big site about the size of Washington, D.C. inside the Beltway, so imagine employees not very happy having to drive 30 minutes out across the site and 30 minutes back for something that took about 30 seconds to get updated. We were paying for people to travel, students that were on co-ops, flying, hotels, to do something that's about a 30-minute exercise. So when finally got to my attention as the president of the company, we started pushing down, and it ended up that wasn't actually a requirement. So it was a specific official's interpretation of what they thought was the right thing to do, and we tried to do one step to be less like the DMV, and that's been able to make everybody a lot happier.
So this is something you've actually subtracted.
Yes.
All right, so a round of applause. That's a good example, and I love things that actually happen. And thank you, but let's move into the realm of stuff that's maybe driving you crazy, you want to get rid of. So what do we got? We got a gentleman right here.
Hello?
Hi.
When I was 16, I got a job at I was a frontline product specialist at a $8 billion company. Some of you guys know it, Jersey Mike's. So I was working at Jersey Mike's in high school.
Oh, Jersey Mike's, yeah, all right.
So I was, we're slicing meat and everything, and we're selling it to the customers and whatnot. And in order to move on past just the normal shift worker, you become certified for a safe, like CertaSafe thing, and it would be like a booklet of 200 pages where you'd have to be tested on it by your manager. I never got that far because I just didn't do it because it was so ridiculous. I was doing everything I was already doing, and they just wanted me to get this certification. And I was working there in high school, and I was like, why would I do that?
So did you quit?
I was asked not to return, but that's...
So that was some real...
So technically, yes.
So this is one of the things that, and I better not say what it is, which ones they are, but so I've been having a lot of conversations with the Simplify Stanford movement, and I don't know about where you work, but where I work, it seems like every year some bureaucrat decides that I need another 30-minute online training. And the interesting thing is that when you actually talk to good lawyers, not bad lawyers, when you talk to good lawyers, that a lot of times you don't need those trainings, at least for everyone. And I think this is one of those, I wonder if a Jersey Mike's lawyer needed to get in there and fix that. So but that's really a good example. So thank you, that was wonderful entertaining. Okay, we got 2 or 3 more, we got time, I love that. What's driving you crazy? What could you? The gentleman we'll get you next. We have a gentleman in the front row and the back, so our mic folks are going to get exercises. Yes, sir.
Yes, so I work in a higher ed institution like yourself, and one of the issues that bother us and bother employees and the customers is our re-entry. So students who were on academic suspension or something like that coming back into the institution, or some who just stepped away from school for a while and then want to come back. The process is just hectic for everybody. So for them, so many hurdles. They have to go to the dean of the school, or if they're in a business school or College of Arts and Sciences. So they just have to jump through so many hoops in order to get back into the institution. And so it makes it difficult on our folks in the admissions office, as well as in our faculty, as well as the students trying to come back in.
So you need some human-centered design to fix this process and get rid of some steps.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and a lot of us need that, but every institution of higher learning. Okay, what's your name, by the way? Damian, thank you. Okay, and we have the fellow in the front row. A round of applause. Thank you. Oh my, we're making this guy work. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Alex.
Just reporting. I feel like everyone hates reporting. There's definitely a purpose for it, but specifically in consulting, always have a deliverable that's a weekly status report, a monthly status report. You usually have your program lead that you need to report to weekly, and then they have their monthly, quarterly, so on. I have no reason why that exists because I know for sure that no one reads what we do. I never see that information anywhere else. It's never questioned. So to subtract, just something related to a yes/no. A notification goes out. Do you have a high-risk item? Do you have an urgent request? Do you have 2 or 3 things? And if I answer yes, you get access to a meeting or something.
So you already have the solution. It's not that hard to implement.
Oh, that's just my potential subtraction.
But it would work, actually.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, but the advantage of asking whether it's high risk or not is that what makes the lawyers happy.
Yeah.
Because the reason they really want all the details is when you do something risky,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
It's only when you mess up that you need documentation.
Yeah, of course. but then also when you mess up, the lawyers don't want documentation in some ways either, so it's actually complicated. So thank you. All right. Maybe 1 or 2 more. That was great. 1 or 2 more. Oh, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're getting it working. All right.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Stephen. Just thinking back to the first job I had out of college as a software engineer. And so in addition to all the work we did, each week we were responsible for itemizing where all our time went down to hour level granularity, to the point where it took like an hour to do it. So the exercise itself needed to show up on the report too. But it was really taxing and just completely detracted.
What was your job?
I was a software engineer for Motorola.
Software, when you're a software engineer, you have to just basically bullshit about that too, right?
Yeah, and it was different projects that you could potentially be doing. And then it's like, on this project, I worked, testing was this amount of time, and actually writing code was this amount of time. So I think it was rolling up into somebody's understanding of how much each project was costing, but ultimately it really didn't accomplish what they were looking for.
All right. Well, thank you. That's a great one. One more. Thank you, sir. One more. Oh, good. Thank you to our microphone runners here. They're getting their exercise in this giant room. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, appreciate it. I'm Jelani Taylor. I work at an AI startup called Elise AI. I'm in sales. And something that bothers me a lot personally is it's actually when good things happen. So it's like when a deal is closed, like the person signed, our CFO countersigns. We have to verify all of this information before we send the contract out. And then once they countersign, they send me an email saying, please log into Salesforce and move it to the next step so that we can start everything. And if I'm at an event like this and somebody signs, I become a bottleneck because I didn't log in and confirm the things I've already confirmed. So instead of them just automatically closing it so that our implementation team can start, it's always waiting on the salesperson, whether you're on vacation or not, to open your laptop, because you can't do it on your phone, to actually move it to the next step. So they need to just automate
at least they
that.
could put it on your phone so they could drive you crazy when you're on vacation, right?
Yeah, at least allow me to do that. It's a couple quick kind of clicks, but now I gotta go in and open my laptop every time, and it's just like super unnecessary.
So thank you, that's wonderful. And just two comments. One is, in almost all of these examples, to the extent that the person designing the system understands the work itself, it can be fixed. So you have the intersection of understanding and power is when things actually get fixed. That's why I keep going back. I can't help but the example with the P is almost perfect. If I write another book, that might make the first paragraph. That's like amazing. But understanding the work itself is really important. And then the other part, which, we're humans, we all do this, except for our fellow who actually fixed something at his plutonium waste company, is that we have a tendency when something's broken to point at our fingers at other people, and it's because we're human beings. It's not like, I'm not blaming you, would do the same thing. But in a lot of the organizations we work with, looking in the mirror helps too. And one of my favorite examples, this gentleman just used the word Salesforce. So right when the book came out, I was doing this email presentation. There's 400 vice presidents from Salesforce. And by the way, they didn't have me sign a non-disclosure, so I can do this. Anyways, so what we're doing is we're talking about all of the problems that add to friction. And they do a survey, and the issue that comes out over and over again, and remember, Salesforce owns Slack. Too many Slack messages, too long of Slack messages, stupid Slack messages. And then the head of learning and development, and they're all pointing fingers and blaming him. She gets on, like the Zoom call, and she says, I want each of you to look in the mirror. You are the people who are sending out these stupid, irrelevant messages. I want you each to go back and to try to do better tomorrow. And I thought this idea of sort of looking in the mirror and not just blaming other people, I think is really important for friction fixing, and it gets back to the sort of cone of friction. Okay, so I think we probably have time for one more interactive interlude. So just to plant the seed in about 10 minutes, start thinking about what should be harder, slower, or impossible where you work. So we'll get to that. All right, so in these subtraction exercises, in the subtraction game here, we're talking about little discrete things. Where it's especially powerful, I believe, is when it becomes a movement, a way of life, a norm in the organization. That's what we're trying to do with the Simplify Stanford movement. And to give you two examples, you may recall an hour or so ago, I put up the slide and I talked about this really long form, that the 42-page form that the 2.5 million residents had to complete in the state of Michigan every year to get benefits. Unlike many problems in government, there was this guy named Michael Brennan who I actually first met at the Stanford Design School. And the first time I met him, he was from southeastern Michigan. He was head of the United Way. He got on his hands and knees and rolled out the aforementioned form and said, I'm going to fix this. And he fixed it. He started a nonprofit called Sevilla. He started working with the folks at the Health Services Organization, the department that was responsible for the form. One thing he did I love is he got the top 8 people to try to complete the form. The guy who was head of the agency only got about 25% the way through it and gave up. So he did that. He got the frontline employees involved. He did a whole bunch of prototyping. He got the union involved. And now, a few years later, there's a new form that's 80% shorter. So they actually implemented the form. So to me, this is a case. It's an interesting case of, and it's a little bit like the DMV case I was talking about of fixing processes in government. It's a huge amount of subtraction, but notice rather than just coming in and not understanding the work itself, they took the time to get the people on board. And Michael said something to me really interesting, which was, I thought that those civil servants were lazy, didn't care, and were hostile towards residents. But once I started talking to them, they were actually embarrassed how difficult the form was, and they wanted to fix it too. So I think that's one example. Moving to corporations, this is one of the case studies that my co-author Huggy Rao did. This amazing woman, Pushkala, she and senior leaders at AstraZeneca, a huge international pharmaceutical firm, were worried about all the unnecessary burden that were placed on people. So she and her team, small team out of New Jersey, they led something called the Million Hours campaign, where they made top-down changes and bottom-up changes to reduce the burden that they placed on one another and also on customers. And just one example, and this is something that's a challenge in many large organizations I know, is they had a problem, which was a friction problem and also a morale problem, which was in many countries in the world, when people became a new AstraZeneca employee, they wouldn't be on have a laptop or be on the system for weeks. And you know, when you start a job and you can't get on the system and you don't have a laptop, you're essentially, like, it's really alienating. You can't even start your work. So they did a whole bunch of standardization, a whole bunch of discipline, so no matter what country you're at, you actually are all set up before you get on the job. So this is an example of friction fixing that's also, to me, a fix of the culture, too. And in theory, at least they calculate, and with all due respect to large companies, when people lead initiative, their estimate is they save 2 million hours. I don't really believe that, but they did save a lot of time. Okay, so that's bad friction. Now we're going to talk about good friction. So in about 7 minutes, or 8 minutes, we're going to get you back in your duos and trios, and we're going to think about things that should be difficult or impossible or slow. Okay, so maybe you've heard of Elizabeth Holmes, one of the most famous Stanford dropouts. She's in jail now. She's the one who started this company called Theranos that tried to sell a device that didn't work for blood testing. It was actually, they even got it bought by Walgreens. And there were all these examples where she would sort of, and her team would sell this product that didn't work. As I said, that's why she's in jail right now. And but anyhow, there was one point, if you read this amazing book, Bad Blood, about the experience where she was really pushing bureaucrats in the U.S. Army to put her device on U.S. Army helicopters. And there was this lieutenant colonel who stood up to her, and also General Mattis, a 4-star general, who was also pushing against them too, who eventually ended up on Theranos' board, to not put it on the helicopters, because you can't put a device, a medical device, on U.S. Army helicopters that does not have FDA approval. And her device did not have FDA approval. So I think this is good friction. Making it impossible to do something that's dangerous, stupid, unlawful, I think this is good friction. Okay, so that's sort of the stuff that should be impossible to do. Now let's talk about what should be easy versus hard. So, and this is a very Stanfordish thing, is this notion that, yes, when should you sort of move fast and break things, and when should you slow down and think about it? And a good question to ask here is failure cheap, safe, and reversible? If it's cheap, safe, and reversible, then it should be really easy to do. This is what Jeff Bezos calls a two-way door. And if it doesn't do much harm to people, you shouldn't have to slow down and think about it. But if it's something like firing the CEO, doing a huge acquisition, that's when you should actually slow down and think about it. And my friend Diego Rodriguez, he's quoted here, he was at IDEO for years. Now he's basically a professional board member. And the question that he used to ask when he was an IDEO partner to his clients is, where is your place for failing? Because there's some places where you can fail, you can prototype, you're not really going to hurt anyone. And then there's some places, I don't know, surgery, flying an airplane, that's the place where we don't want the failure. Okay. And, oh, this is my favorite example of a reversible change. So this is David Kelly. For those of you who are new to Stanford or know at Stanford, David is one of my favorite people ever. He's a tenured chaired professor who doesn't have a PhD. He can barely write, by the way, to be honest. But he did start this amazing firm called IDEO. That's one of the most innovation consulting firm. And he's been teaching at Stanford forever. He started something called the Stanford Design School, and he's brought in a huge amount of money. And so early on, when David was running IDEO, it was a little company, about 50 people in Palo Alto. I was hanging out there a lot. I was doing a qualitative study of them. And I think everybody in this room has probably been through a reorganization. And we know how tough reorganizations are. People get fired, they get forced to do stuff. It's a pretty ugly process. This was the most benign, loving reorganization I've ever seen in my life. So there's about 50 people in downtown Palo Alto. He has 3 people stand up who became studio heads because it just got too big, and each of them gave a pitch about why you should join my studio. And everybody got their first choice. Like, I didn't even know that this is even possible. Okay, so the most benign, humane reorganization possible, people freaked out at IDEO just like if it had been a massive layoff, and they were just hysterical. And so what David did was at the next meeting, after they'd all sort of moved into their new studios. So he's famous for having this Groucho Marx mustache, which he has. So what he does is he shaves off his mustache. And by the way, a sign of how weird he looked is his then wife screamed when she came out of the shower naked and put her clothes back on because she didn't recognize the guy standing there. That was like, we were all freaking out. And he says to the whole company at the company-wide meeting, so this is just like our product prototypes. We can change it. We can grow it back just like my mustache. And I thought that was a really good example of sort of making clear that a change is reversible. Okay, so that's the question of whether it's reversible or not. The next one is, who knows, ChatGPT, large language models, and so forth may save us. But just as somebody who's followed the creativity literature for 45 or 50 years and followed especially a professor named Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School, who's probably the leading creativity researcher in organizations ever, I can't figure out how to do it in a way that's efficient, and neither can Teresa. So I think there are some venture capitalists here. There's no evidence that the success rate for the number of firms that venture capital firms has improved over the years. They fail at an incredible rate, but many of them are really rich. If you look at the number of firms that are started, most of them sort of fail. Most products fail. Most movies fail. Most jokes by comedians fail. And the only way that I can figure out and Teresa can figure out to sort of get through the creativity process is to have a lot of failure and to pick a few wins along the way. And as Teresa's research shows, and she studied creativity processes very closely with diaries, once people started rushing creativity processes, that's when they'd start falling apart, when they'd start rushing them too much. So this is one case. There might be a way to make some processes less inefficient. Probably the best way to make creativity less inefficient is to get good at pulling the plug on failed projects, which organizations and people are pretty bad at, but it's pretty hard to speed up. Okay, a couple more and then we're going to get you in your groups. So the other thing is cognitive trust versus emotional trust. There's great research. Think of a surgeon and an anesthesiologist, the 2 pilots who are flying you who never met each other. When the rules and roles are clear, the people who never work together can do a pretty good job. But all the evidence is for all kinds of work, the longer that people work together and the better they know each other, though that's the hallmark of really high-performing teams. So, I mean, you've got Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett who worked together for 65 years. If you look at startups that came out of Stanford, a hallmark of the ones that succeed, going back to Hewlett-Packard, zooming up to Larry and Sergey at Google and many newer ones, is that people start working together on group projects and figure out they develop a relationship together. So this idea of having a team that has what they call prior joint experience is the hallmark of successful teams. And by the way, to go back to the cockpit and to go back to surgery, There's evidence that the more procedures that a surgeon and an anesthesiologist does together, the better off you're going to be in surgery. And also, there's evidence that usually duos of pilots work together for 2 or 3 days, that they're less likely to make a minor mistake, because if they make a big mistake, they crash, and their last flight together than on their first flight. So prior joint experience. And then we're about ready to send you in your duos or trios, just as a little bonus episode. So in general, we like to do things that are fast, but there's an interesting academic literature on what they call savoring. And there's a bunch of research that shows that for people who have good mental health, or if you want to create good mental health, that getting people to slow down and savor the good things in life, that's part of designing experience and part of your job as a leader too. In this one, it just weirds me out, but it exists. So there's this thing called Jumbo Supermarkets. It's the largest supermarket chain in the Netherlands, okay? And so there was a big issue in the Netherlands where there was loneliness among older people, and they figured out that one of the people who older, lonely people would talk to was the cashier in their grocery stores. So they experimented with slow lanes. Like, you go to the grocery store, and the person in front of you have to wait 8 minutes while they talk to the clerk. This would drive me absolutely nuts, to tell you the truth. But it turned out that there was a certain kind of customer who really enjoyed this, and now they've scaled this up to hundreds of grocery stores. So this is an example of slowing down to savor. Okay, so now what I want you to do, and you're already trained, so what I want you to do is get back in your duo and trio, and think about the work that you and your colleagues do. What should be slower, difficult, or downright impossible? So you're trained, go do it. Where should you add friction? Okay, let's have some examples of things where you need friction. Slower, difficult, more impossible, or impossible. And let's start out with the back. You're trained. Somebody in the back. You're all staring at me blankly, but somebody will raise their hand, I promise you. There we go, in the very back row, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a physician as well, and I think your story about the supermarket lines, when I see older patients in my clinic, we don't necessarily get recognized financially based on the amount of time we spend with people as much as just single events. And I would certainly say that older people need more time, need more explanation, sometimes have to step outside of the event and say, I just know I have to take more time with this. So that would be an example that I would give in what I do that should definitely be slower.
Okay, well, that's it. Well, thank you. And what's your name?
Craig Mahoney.
Thanks, Craig. All right, that's a great one. Thank you. Both humane and slower. Okay, another one. That's a lovely one to start with. Slower, harder, impossible. All right, we got lots of hands up here. We'll just wait for somebody with a microphone to get to you. Oh, look at it. Okay, we'll stay in the back, and then we'll move to the people in front. Yes, sir.
So I'll stand up for it. I thought about it because Dr. Mahoney just mentioned it. So I actually work in medical device. So I sell to people like Dr. Mahoney. One of the things that I think works well when we're dealing with our customers, physicians and nurses, is when we actually slow things down. I could probably go off and run to 3 or 4 more accounts and try to sell something, or I could spend an extra hour or two with my customers, getting to know them better, what their needs are, so that they feel more confident in me coming into the room to support their procedures, and then ultimately using our products moving forward.
Okay, so and in both of those examples, it's like you can't hurry love or explanation sometimes. Sometimes it takes a while. Okay, there's a bunch of hands. What's your name? Don. Okay, a round of applause for Don. All right. So let's do 2 more, and then we're going to move to wrap up. So, we got a couple right here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Chris Carr. I work at a full-service immigration law firm, and we're in the DC area. We're growing like crazy. We've had 40% growth for 3 years straight, and it's just all the business. We have so many customers coming, and a lot of times now you have some people are saying, oh, USCIS sent us this denial for this visa petition, only have 5 days to do appeal, or only have 2 days to do appeal, or I would like to file a petition for a review with the Fourth Circuit and only have 5 days, right? And our philosophy has been we're going to accept everything. And so we've been accepting all these clients sometimes, right? But then you have so many paralegals and people that are overworked. And then I think if people are overworked, then mistakes can happen. And so on the one hand, you don't want to turn down business. But on the other hand, too, it's like, well, if we slow down a little bit and we did say, hey, we can't accept these cases right now because we just don't have the bandwidth to do it. It's a fine line, but I think sometimes we could do things to slow down. And we have implemented some procedures and some guidelines like, hey, if we're put in this position, they're going to have to pay this much more, or we're going to just have to say, hey, you got to come back because we can't overwork people. Because in the long run, if we're accepting too many cases at once, then I think that can come back to bite us, and then you can have people that are just running out of steam and saying, hey, I don't want to do this anymore, and you don't want to get rid of good paralegals. So yeah, I think that's one aspect within our company that I think is phenomenally well run. But I think we can slow down in that aspect.
But I mean, that's a great example. And all of it's like we want to service and be friends. And in my case, it'd be nice to have 300 students in a class, but I would ruin the class completely if I accepted them. So that's a great example. Thank you very much. One more, and then we'll go to wrap up. Yes, sir. Fellow in the blue shirt right here.
Couple of organizations I've worked for, risk management. And I think there's a lever to risk, meaning low risk opportunities should be really easy to get done and get through versus high risk. High risk then requires X, Y, and Z to go along with the submission. And in the ground level, it seemed like we called underwriting the deal prevention team. It was so frustrating a lot of times. But as you look at it from a different perspective, you start to realize that if something's really high risk, and you force that customer to provide all of these different things, you protect the organization by letting them filter themselves out because they don't want to jump through the hoops.
Yeah, so that's a good, and it's actually very similar to the example that our consultant here was talking about, that for the high risk work, that's where you really want to interrogate it, and that's where if you don't do it, you either end up with a client you don't want or you end up with a lawsuit you don't want 10 years later. Okay, thank you all very much. Those were wonderful. Let me just say a few parting words, and then we can declare victory. Okay, so one more time, the main idea of this book, and really, it's more than a book. It's a project that Huggy and I have been working on for 10 years, and I still work on one way or another almost every day. The best leaders are trustees of others' time, so this idea of feeling like you're a trustee of others' time, not just your own time. And they have the will and skill to make the right things easier and the wrong things harder. I think that's what we've been talking about for nearly an hour and a half. And I want to end with my standard almost thing I say about everything, which is I always worry when I tell too many stories, including stories about amazing people like Bill Campbell and all these different success stories, that somehow you may start believing that your organization, something's wrong with it because it's so hard to get things done and everybody's so frustrated and everybody's so pissed off. And a contrary view of this is that life is messy, and even in the best organizations, it's going to happen. One solution, this is Clara Shai, and this is, I don't say this lightly, she's one of the 2 or 3 smartest Stanford students ever met. She was #1 in computer science. She wrote a bestseller when she was 28 on Facebook. She started her own company. Now, I don't know how long she's going to last, but she was sort of head of AI at Facebook, but then they hired all these people, paid them $100 million or something, so I think she's being pushed aside. So she and I wrote the last 3 paragraphs of the book together, and essentially what it says is that when she does something risky and messy, I'm not going to read the quote, she does what she calls separation of concerns, which is first she warns people things are going to be screwed up, and she sort of has a team or a group that's sort of prepared for things to get messy and to clean them up. Sort of, I think she called it the cleanup on aisle 9 team. And at least everything I've ever been involved in life, that happens. And to take this a further step, and to talk about this point that if you can find an organization that isn't messy, that isn't screwed up, that doesn't drop the ball occasionally, I want to hear about it. Everyone I've ever heard about, once I got to know them better, they screw up just as much as the organizations that seem to get the fingers pointed at them. And perhaps my favorite example is I already mentioned Ed Catmull when I was introducing and talking about Bill Campbell. So Ed Catmull wrote what I think is the best book ever written on creativity. It's called Creativity Incorporated. It's about Pixar. It's about this amazing journey he was on. He's just a fantastic leader. So anyhow, so I love that book. And so at one point, I'm at Pixar, and I was really excited because I got Ed to sign my book, my Creativity Incorporated book. And I ran into one of the animators, they call him, in the cafeteria at Pixar, and he looks at the book and he said, "Oh, I love that book. I love that company. I wish I worked there." And if you think about it, I mean, the message that he was giving was that everything's a little screwed up in its own way, so your organization and any organization is not going to be perfect in terms of friction problems, but still the best we can do is to fix stuff within our cone of friction. Okay, I'm done. So thank you all so much, and thank you for all of your report outs. You were very active. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Mark.
Awesome, Bob.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
You're terrific.